Welcome back. Let's continue with some more pertinent chats, because we've also seen several jazz venues that were forced to close doors due to COVID-19 pandemic. This was back in 2020. Live streaming then became the only option that they had to really keep the music playing. But streaming as a revenue source, it doesn't make the venue owners feel much better. It pales in comparison to the cash that's obviously earned from ticket sales and food and drinks alike. And our popular jazz club, of course, closed its doors in May. Some reopened briefly, but only then to be shut down again. And so this morning, we're going to be looking into the reasons behind this decline. We're going to be joined by Scelo Mdladla, founder of Phinda Mzala Music. Brenda Sisane as well joins us virtually, of course, accomplished journalist and broadcaster, and also jazz events organizer. Well, good morning. Good morning to the both of you, and thank you for joining us. It's definitely been, a topic of concern. And so, Brenda, let's start with you. If we're looking at the scene to date and what really has transpired in relation to jazz venues closing down post the pandemic, what is the reality on the ground? What are those contributing factors?
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
When I got this question, I asked myself a number of things, and I also spoke to some colleagues. The question is, when it's specific jazz venues that are closing, then we should ask ourselves the question about how the economy, the interest in seeing jazz as an interlocutor for development and all these other good reasons of why we need a thriving jazz scene, is to ask ourselves what we are investing in that. If we're looking at other venues that use jazz to attract feet into their establishments, that's a different call altogether. And I don't mean to denigrate either. What I mean to say is that some of the venues close because it is a tough time economically, and it's not unique to South Africa. There's quite a number of very reputable jazz spaces that we know about. I remember recently Ronnie Scott's in London was in trouble, and it took a benevolent investor to come and save it. The question is, what is our own take on this? What are the kind of support structures that we have that look after these venues? Because traditionally, jazz clubs are places of passion, of encouraging the music, of getting the artists to be heard, whose work deserves that attention. But they're not traditionally defined as enterprises that are meant to be highly profitable. Yeah. They possibly meant to create an enabling environment for the establishment and for the artists.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for setting that context and for that, those remarks, because Scelo, on the back of what Brenda's echoed, if we're looking at the urban space and in imagining or reimagining what's possible, particularly if we're looking at what's happening in downtown Joburg and that value chain, what are you observing on that front? If we're looking at the essence of what the inner city also means at large, how do we begin to reimagine what is possible given this dire state for jazz?
I mean, like the conversation we heard earlier when I got here.
Yes.
That we are so dependent on private sector and individuals to to support the jazz. Like I was looking at, even if you remember when Orbit closed down.
Yes.
The aim was to they had this crowdfunding campaign that they started, and the aim was to raise up to 1 million, but they only reached 30,000. And after that they closed down. So I agree with us, Brenda, on what are we doing as individuals, as companies, and even as the government. That's a question each and every one of us need to ask ourselves.
Sure. Okay. So it's an integrated approach and a collaborative approach. I mean, it's also symbolic, given the history of our country and the role that jazz has played, and even to Brenda's point about the passion, it being places of passion. Brenda, if we're looking at the actual operations then as well, because I mean, there's an entire value chain. It's part of the creative economy as on that nightlife that helps small vendors. You've got different aspects as well. There's ticket sales, there's food and drinks, etc. Talk to us about that business model that also has to be reimagined. I mean, we're having G20 summit that's happening later on in the year. This is what people want. This is part of our identity as well. This is an experience that we uniquely get to offer, but these spaces and places are not existing.
It's a very interesting one. Thank you for that question, because I've always seen through the years when big events are coming to the country, we make it we actually set the small vendor, up, because we tell them that they are going to make money. If you remember, the World Summit was coming and people were told to invest and put together bed and breakfast setups because there's going to be multitudes of people coming to the country. And that is not the case, and that would not be the case either. If we don't put, money into the sector to keep it running so that when these occasions arrive, it makes sense for them, then we really are just talking about what is possible, and we're not even internalizing what it takes to build a jazz sector. As it is now, it is the independent person who wants to, firstly, who loves jazz, who wants to be involved in jazz. It would be the artist, the musician, it could be the writer, the creative, the photographer. They come in from a place of loving to do the work and being able to do that and studying enough to be able to produce work. The question is, are we investing in audience development, our own audience development? And secondly, is our economy speaking to enabling this? If you look at it, you after the basics are taken care of in the household, the school fees have been paid, there's food on the table, all the costs have been taken care of, then you have a budget that you can use for extracurricular activities, for your own enculturation as a person. And the question is, can we afford that as a society? Why is it that we have to look at places of culture as places of enterprise, as places of profiting, without understanding how those came about? And this integrated approach has to apply to the bankers that are banking small businesses. They look at this as a risky business. So everybody can tell you that works in the sector that to invest in somebody with a cultural enterprise does not tick the boxes for the banking institutions, for instance. So nothing is building towards strengthening, the cultural profile that we expect the G20 to find when they get here. Everything else is incidental. It's because the artist is giving of themselves. And when I say artist, I mean everyone else in the value chain of creativity.
Yes, no, absolutely. And that enabling environment is also important. Scelo, just as we also wrap up the call to action from year and two, Brenda's raised some valid points. What does this reimagining look like for you? How do we, in the long term, sustain it, as opposed to just these pop-up scenarios and, the creative sector and those on the value chain continue to suffer and be deemed as high risk?
Sure. So I think us as live music curators, most of us are just depending on funding, whether, like I said, whether from the government or the private, But also, I'm seeing a lot of cultural spaces or jazz spaces compromising themselves to accommodate
other genres,
or not even other genres, other mediums, so that they can. When a call to action comes out, when a call out comes out, it's never specifically for jazz. It's never, so there's a lot of cultural spaces that, how can I put this, that accommodate jazz bands, but they're not necessarily jazz spaces, So the dying of Marabi Club, which is specifically jazz, the dying of Orbits, which is specifically jazz, is, it's a huge hit.
Yeah, valid points. And I think also just, it's interesting to see how from downtown Joburg, because of the planning and security issues as well, it's moved into, areas like Houghton and, you've seen Mandela Sanctuary as an example, etc. So it's also looking about what else is possible if people are preferring, those alternative spaces as well. We've come to the end. I have to leave it there for now, but it's a conversation starter. Thank you to both of you for joining us. Scelo Mdladla, Brenda Sisane, joining us, chatting about the reasons behind some of the jazz clubs in Johannesburg closing down. Just a conversation starter about really what is possible as we imagine, the next couple of years, the sustainability of it as well as contribution to the overall creative industry at large. Let's take a quick ad break and be right back after this.